So I don't know if you know this, but how many people know this? I do a little bit of air show flying on the side. And over the course of my travels on the air show circuit, I think it was like 15 years ago, I was at Warner Robins Air Force Base, and I saw this dude over here, and he's with his female jet mechanic, and I thought that's really unique. So anyway, Randy and I became friends. We have seen each other time and time again. He is a tremendous pilot. He's a great role model for every one of us. He's done so many things for aviation to ensure air safety. He came up, when I go to an air show now, before I can fly in the show, I have to give them extraction data. So if I were to crash or have a problem, they can extract me from the airplane. They know how to get the canopy open, how to turn off the fuel selector valve, how to turn the magnetors off and the battery generator off. All that's covered in your depiction for the crash, fire, and rescue. Who came up with that idea? This guy. And it's not optional anymore, it's mandatory. You can't fly in the show unless you give the air boss and the crash, fire, and rescue guys the extraction data to take you out of your airplane. Randy is a retired airline captain. He just retired, 42 years. He has 36 years of air show experience. Lucky to be alive, frankly. That's true. Come on, man. You're doing 400 knots, 100 feet above the ground. So he's got 1,800 performances, 2,000 in Russian jets. How many Western guys in America have got 2,000 hours in Russian fighter jets? 21,000 hours total flight time. He has flown 46 different types of aircraft manufactured in 9 different countries. He holds a level 1 unlimited jet aerobatic day and night certificate. He can fly aerobatics at night in his jet, and he does it. He does a spectacular job. He does flights with solo or with 2 MiGs or 3 MiGs. He does a mock combat against an F-4 Phantom. He does a mock combat against an F-100. He is an aerobatic competency examiner. That's an ACE. He co-wrote the FAA internal guidance for operating limitations for civilian operations of former jet aircraft. He's a former ICAS safety board member, and he is just an all-around great pilot. You'll learn a lot from Randy Ball. I give you Captain Randy Ball. Give him an applause.
Do I need to use this, or is this mic that I've got on, is that? Need to use both? Gotcha. Well, thanks for having me. It's great being here. I guess I should start off as I was told by Alan I was supposed to tell stories until everybody left. I'm not sure I can keep going that long, but I guess the first story I'll tell you is my first flight as a normal person, as my wife describes it, was today. I just retired a few weeks ago from the airlines, and so for 32 years I'm used to bypassing security and just going straight to the gate. And Tina was watching me to make sure I didn't have a Dr. Pepper in my suitcase. Can't do that anymore. And you have to take your shoes off now, and you have to take your jacket off now, and you have to get in this line, and I'm not used to that, any of the above. So she put up with me. She's used to traveling at air shows all over North America and doing that while I'm waving ID and go right around her and onto the flight. So anyway, thanks for coming with me, Tina, and this is my wife, Tina, who takes good care of me, both at air shows and when we do events like this. I'm going to talk a little bit about the flying air shows, as you might expect, and a little bit about some of the other stuff that we do. In fact, it wasn't until we got here that we realized that we're booked. I'm booked to fly the show here in September. So we'll be bringing a MiG into this airport and performing. So I'll let you watch a little teaser and then I'll get started. So that's a little bit of what I do on the weekends. You know, mow the yard, fly upside down. It was always a thing, you know. I learned to fly while still in high school. Actually, did my first flight, took off and landed, landing an airplane the first time when I was about 11 with my dad. So I've been at this for quite a while. One of my heroes, my own great uncle, Gilbert, did 51 missions over Germany in a B-17 as aircraft commander. Part of that was with the 9th Air Force, which the 57th was a part of during World War II. So kind of cool. I've been doing this. This was taken just a few weeks ago. No, it was about 10 years ago, right? About 10 years ago. So that was an early air show performance, doing a pre-flight. Actually, that was me. I think I'm 4 or 5 at the Air Force Museum. So I was ruined to have to get a job long ago. Had to do this as a career. This is when we start right now. Actually, this time of year we're in what we call winter maintenance season. So because we're max performing the aircraft, let me spin this around a little bit. Because we're max performing the aircraft, from the time I take off, I roll the aircraft as part of the cleanup when I raise the gear. We do an extensive maintenance program. This is, I'll show you, get Tina to stop the video just a little bit farther. That's probably good there, Tina.
Oh, sorry, it went back.
There you go. That's fine. So MiG-17s use a centrifugal flow jet engine, which of course, those of you in the maintenance department would be more like an APU today. They're not very efficient from a fuel ratio, fuel burn to thrust, or by the fuel consumption for the amount of thrust you get. But essentially the air comes down the MiG-17's intake, divided in two around the pilot, goes through a centrifugal flow through each one of those combustion containers, and then out the tailpipe. It's a raised area there because it's the MiG-17 was the first operational fighter for the Soviets to have reheat, or afterburners as we call it. British call it reheat. They actually beat the U.S. in the air with an operational afterburner by just a little bit. We of course invented the flying tail, which allowed us to go through the sound barrier much easier. But this is kind of what it looks like in our hangar right this minute. Ejection seats out on that 17. That's kind of what you would, how the thing works. Every year we take these things down apart as far as we can, changing out parts that we think we may need to swap out throughout the season, because the aircraft stay on the airshow circuit a lot. They don't come home. It's 400 gallons an hour cross country to operate one of these aircraft. So bringing them home on the week, you know, in between air shows, unless you have to, doesn't really happen a lot. When we perform here, I'd have to look at the schedule, but we're probably coming from an Air Force base on the East Coast, then tag in Atlanta, then go in somewhere else, hop skipping around. I'd added this little short video. It's only a few seconds, but that's kind of how that works. Has a dolly kind of system. Once the thing is unbolted and everything is disconnected, it's how the tail comes off the airplane. A lot of airplanes, the Sabre had a similar system. The F-100 had a slightly different system. F-84, T-33, a lot of jets from that era. That's how you got in and did major maintenance. The problem is, of course, that's time consuming. In later jets, you were able to roll the jet engine right out of the tail of the airplane. I was watching up at Langley several years ago. We changed an engine on an F-22, and they did it in about 25 minutes. So engine out, engine back in, and they were ready to run it up within 45 minutes of doing paperwork. So I was just, last engine change we did, I think it took us about 6 weeks, volunteer help, something like that, maybe a little longer. So it doesn't always go that way. This is in Goshen, Indiana, last summer, when the inner landing gear door was interfering with the upper landing gear door. So all into the night, we're working on the airplane so that we can perform the next day. Volunteer, these are flight students at the little school there. They're all, you know, jumped around eager to help the whole system to figure out how it works. And we had to find hydraulic fluid and hydraulic mule and all this sort of stuff. And we carry a lot of the stuff with us, but And we don't like to work on aircraft at an air show, obviously, but it's sometimes a necessary evil. This is kind of the routine I fly, or will fly this coming year. The fourth maneuver down is not a loop, it is a 8G medium radius turn. So the pilot flies it as horizontal, about a couple hundred feet off the ground, doing about 400 knots indicated, and hold 8G for 360. The MiG-17 was the only fighter in the world until the F-16 flew in '74 that could perform that maneuver, which is why it gave us such fits in Vietnam. We had 82 combat losses to the MiG-17 in the Vietnam War. And it's one of the reasons we have Top Gun today in the Fighter Weapons School. In 1967, early 68, the Israelis stole 3 MiG-17s and 2 MiG-21s and turned them over to the CIA in a project called Have Drill, Have Donut. It's been declassified. You can go home and read all about it on the internet. When I first was told about it, it was not, and we were instructed on what we could talk about and what we couldn't. But essentially, the Air Force used it to go to Congress and get funding for what they call the bantamweight fighter competition, which was the YF-20, YF-16, and the YF-17. The Air Force ultimately picked the F-16, or what became the F-16. The Navy liked the YF-17, but they wanted some changes done, so Northrop and McDonnell Douglas modified it some, and it morphed into the Hornet, the F-18, because we wanted something, instead of a one-size-fits-all like the F-4 in Vietnam, we wanted a little more specific stuff. So that from their philosophy after that was they would have both a bantamweight dogfighting aircraft and an air superiority aircraft. So the Tomcat became the air superiority aircraft, with the Hornet being the light. F-16 was the F-15 and the F-16. So this routine is designed to kind of show off the aircraft's performance capability rather than just be an aerobatic demonstration. On takeoff roll, as the gear comes up and I clean up the aircraft, I roll the aircraft upside down in the form of a repositioning turn. Comes in for the first pass, which is a inverted pass. It's usually flown at about 300 knots, a few hundred feet off the ground. To an arcing pass. This fourth pass, I'll come in at around 360 to 380 knots indicated. Roll to a 90 degree, go straight to 8G and hold 8G until I see the line that I started on. Roll wings level, and come out of that into a half Cuban that goes to about 4,500 feet AGL. So that combination at a civilian show a lot of times doesn't get a whole lot of attention, but you do that maneuver at a fighter base, always gets attention. First couple of times I did a demonstration years ago on a contract where I flew up to Mountain Home Air Force Base, which at the time had a wing of F-16s and a wing of F-15Es. And then my whole goal there was to demonstrate that maneuver for a bunch of guys to fix and deploy to South Korea during a time when we were, the current guy's father was making a bunch of noise, and they wanted to kind of see what one of the airplanes that they might be put up against. And so I took off. When I landed there, I had drop tanks on the airplane, and I went to the club and nobody would even sit beside me hardly, But early the next morning, without drop tanks on the airplane, I took off, rolled the airplane on takeoff, came around and did an 8G, circle the tower at about 100 feet off the ground into a half Cuban and landed. And I didn't have to pay for my beer the rest of the time I was there. Yeah, that was the whole point is that you're G'ing up the aircraft or inducing drag and being able to retain enough energy to not only make the 360 but then go into a vertical maneuver. And that retention of energy is huge. The F-16 was the first aircraft that could do it other than the MiG-17. So, of course, it had a lot of limitations, didn't have radar, and when we fought it most of the time in Vietnam, it only had guns. Later, they morphed to some missiles on them. Of course, thanks to Robin Olds, we morphed guns onto the Phantom, so that the technology kind of crossed there. From that maneuver, I come back, slow it down about 200 knots at about 50 to 75 feet off the ground. On the 500-foot show line, light the afterburner at about show center, and slowly pull the nose up to about a 70-degree angle of attack and accelerate at a 70-degree angle of attack. A couple rolls, come back for a photo pass that's flown at around 220 to 240 knots. More or less as a knife edge. It's hard to depict that there, but it would be flown as a fairly acute line from a corner marker, rolling a jet over onto a hard 90 and then pulling it around the crowd so that you're holding about a 3.5 to 4G pull. From there, we do a vertical roll into the box at 500 to 550 indicated at about 50 feet off the ground. Show center, 7 to 8G pull to the vertical, and do typically 2, sometimes 3, depending on the weather, aileron rolls, which will take me to about 12,000 feet in around 9 seconds. What that translates into is to about a 45,000 feet a minute climb. So, yeah, I get to the top and I hang upside down for a second and go, yeehaw, you know, Jester's dead. From there, do a high-speed pass if we have nice smooth air. We'll come back to the 500-foot line. I'll stop a second there. When I say 500-foot line or 1,500-foot line, for those of you that aren't in the air show business, air show or aerobatic box is usually a rectangle horizontal to the crowd. And the FAA requires that we stay no more than 500 feet, no closer than 500 feet from the crowd as we go around corner markers on the edges. And then the distance that we can fly parallel to the crowd is dependent on the energy. So aircraft that can do maneuvers below 200 knots, like a Pitts or an extra 300 or another aerobatic airplane, can fly that on 500-foot line or 500 foot measured from the crowd. Aircraft that are up to 250, like a Mustang or a Corsair, that kind of stuff, is 1,000 feet from the crowd line. And aircraft that are going to be performing above 250 knots are 1,500 feet from the crowd. So when I'm aerobatic, I'm going to be 1,500 feet from the crowd horizontally. But if it's a non-aerobatic maneuver, because of the aerobatic rating I hold, I'm allowed to bring that jet right back to 500 feet and do that maneuver right in front of the crowd. So that maneuver is done fairly low so that as a mom and dad and the 2.5 kids are staring at the show, you know, they can get some background, the trees in the background, so forth like that. And I'll do that at 0.9 to 0.93 Mach, or 93% speed of sound, at typically 50 feet or lower to the ground. So with that, the human eye is seeing the background behind it, houses, trees, or whatever behind it, and so you can really get an indication of the speed that it's going. When you do that at altitude, you're going just as fast, but there's nothing relative for the human eye to see, so it's harder to see it. From there, come back into the show center, do a roll away from the crowd, into the downwind, and recover. All that's about 12 to 14 minutes and consumes about 225 gallons of jet fuel. Now I'm going to show you a video from the cockpit. This was this is practice day, Rochester, New York. I'm raising the landing gear. It's what you'll pay attention to my left arm there. You can see I'm back on the throttle, and that's a takeoff. This airport has a commercial service, so you'll see that occasionally off to the belly of the aircraft as I go around the tower here, and the crowd's going to be away from it, just would be right in front of me there. You can kind of get an idea though from there that as I'm climbing out, just flying the speed that I'm performing that. Most of that's at 325 to 375 knots indicated. Down the long runway, which is they have kind of an interesting box. It's kind of a Y-shaped. A couple of times you'll see the terminal here go by, and then that's an 8G turn. You can tell by my eyes if you don't see the vapor off the wings. That's what an 8G turn looks like from my vantage point. And from that, we're going to go into a half Cuban. You can't fly through the clouds in this FAA requirements, so I'm going to be glancing up a couple times to make sure I can find that blue hole in the right spot. And then we're going to pull a 7G pull into the half Cuban. Back through a little hole, and back down I go at about a 80-degree nose down attitude. Then it'll be a 3G to 4G stop or arrest of the descent. this is what the photo pass. So this is about 250 knots. So I'm still going almost 300 miles an hour, but you understand the difference in the speed from the earlier passes. When the terminal goes by here in a second, you'll get to see the climb, the vertical climb from that. That was part of the little thrust away to the one where you light the afterburner down low and go up. So here's the vertical climb. Up we go. Start the roll. There's the terminal down below us. There's the terminal again. And there's 12,000 feet. So over 2 miles straight up in 9 seconds. It's almost like flying a turbo 172 versus a regular 172. So the next one, if you watch in front of the wing off on my left side, where the camera's mounted for this, and you'll see what 0.9 Mach looks like. It's about a 9,000 foot runway, and we're going to cover it in around 6 or 7 seconds. So we're getting the clearance to go in. The terminal will pass actually on that side of the aircraft, and you'll be able to see the taxiways go by underneath me and so forth. And you get a little idea of, you actually, as I get close to the sound barrier, you'll see a little vapor starting to form right behind the canopy. I'm probably 550 indicated right there. We're going to accelerate to about 600, right at 600 something knots at that altitude. There goes the terminal again. And boom, that was 9,000 feet of runway. Now I'm at speedboards out and flight idle, just coasting to bleed off the energy. We go to about 9,500 feet, just bleeding off the energy to get down to maneuvering speed to get back down for the recovery. So that's what my office looks like. It's got a better view than a regular job. So it's another reason why there's no way I could have a job. You had to do something different. So this is what it looks like. I'm the only jet aerobatic pilot. Alan didn't say, the only jet aerobatic pilot in North America, I think currently not in the world, but currently North America, that can do the same maneuvers at night. So many shows that have a night component, I'll fly the aerobatics in the dark. Of course, the challenge of this is the human eye doesn't see depth, doesn't have very good depth perception in low light. So at the speed you're going, when you're 500 indicated and so forth, you definitely don't want to, you want to avoid the ground. That's a foul. So that gets to be a lot more of the challenge. Plus, keeping which side's up. I picked this video to show you because this was at Cherry Point Marine Air Station a few years ago, and it's got enough of the buildings lit up that you can kind of see. You see the glow of the afterburner on the wing and a little bit on the tail. So here's another half Cuban, I think, done in the dark. A little more challenging. That was the high-speed pass, I think, or just a little bit of it. Or maybe a vertical roll, don't remember. That was a vertical roll. We were doing the same vertical roll now over the base. Last year at Oshkosh, this is, I think, a high speed that somebody sent us, wasn't it? I think, yeah. And this is a little farther away, but you get a little idea of the height I fly at. Oh, we're going to see it again, I guess, or we're going to next. Alan, I'll show you how to start it if you want to.
I want to check out, Randy.
Yeah. This is high over Selfridge Air Force Base, out of one of those maneuvers. I was there flying with a F-4 Phantom, and every day I had to die in front of the crowd. I don't know what that's about, but the base commander insisted that I had to die every day. But anyway, all those little specks over my shoulder are boats. out there watching the show for free from where they are. So, at any rate, I usually open it up for questions here at this point in time because I'm sure there's somebody has a question about this kind of flying. Yes.
I have a question, but your eyesight, is it 20/20? Did you have to get LASIK or anything?
No, I was very blessed. When I did, I actually never made it into the Air Force. I was accepted in the Air Force and was going to go in the ROTC program, but my timing age-wise arrived about the same time the Clintons did. So the budget cuts, rapid budget cuts, the Air Force was losing multiple wings out of the Air Force, and even people that were going to college going to the academy weren't going to get flight slots. So I ended up learning to fly on these things as a military contractor for a short period of time. But my eyesight, when the Air Force originally tested me, was better than 20/10 all the way down into moonlight. So I was held over a day at the center in San Antonio, Texas, and did all kinds of reading and blue light and yellow light and all kinds of stuff while they poked and prodded and so forth. So they estimated at 2008, both from near vision, intermediate, and distance vision. I'm 62 years old and I still pass a Class 1 medical uncorrected eyesight. So very, very, very blessed to have that. I'm starting to have a little issues occasionally with near stuff, and it really bugs me, and Tina gives me no sympathy at all. My AME, I think he sees around 14 to 1,600 pilots a year in the Dallas area, and one of the ladies that does the eye part said, yeah, I'm down to one or two that's at my age that can test out to that level. I still can test out better than 20/20 at distant vision, about 20/20 at intermediate, and 20/25 is what I just did in December in near vision. So I think you get, correct me, it's 20/40 I think is the limit.
20/40 at near and
is the limit. So
you are obviously blessed.
yes, yes, I was very, very blessed. The thing that was unique that the Air Force kept poking and prodding me about was the ability to see that well at night in low light. So can't remember the candlelight unless there's been too many years, but it was essentially a simulated moon, and I could read normal text at a normal rate in the moonlight. So that was kind of their big thing that they kept trying to figure out what I had more colors and lights shined in my eyes and then they had me in a dome thing where they were how far out I could get, and I could still give you a letter all the way out to almost 90 degrees to where I was looking. So again, that's you just had to be just blessed. That's all I can say. Yep.
Two questions. Number one, is your ejection seat Russian hardware, or did you get something better?
So it's combination hardware. We fly the aircraft with operational ejection seats. The ejection seat is Soviet. The explosive pyrotechnics is Soviet. When I was flying these things very briefly for an organization at Holloman Air Force Base, they had modified a SA-22 parachute. An F-100, F-86, 105, I think, all carried the B-52 still carries it, BA-22, back automatic, -22 parachute. And this SA is just simply seat automatic. So the canopy is below you sitting in the seat pan, much like a World War II aircraft that has a parachute in the seat pan. The parachutes have water wings on them. They have ELTs in them, ballistic openers, bailout bottles for ejection at high altitude. It's full up. The parachute that we operate is maintained for us at NASA at Ellington. They still use them in the T-38s. So we had to get a new canopy about a year ago. We were getting time limited, and we were able to get a new canopy. It's the same. The parachute is just like you see in the movies with Top Gun. It's orange and green and white, 28-foot round canopy. So if I eject out of there, it's fairly automated, even given its time. Now that ejection seat was updated. It was not the original. They had a different type of ejection seat back when the airplane was first put into service, but in the mid-70s, they modified the seat It's still not a 0-0 seat by any stretch of the imagination, but they added a face curtain. The ejection seat headrest there is actually has a big springs in it and multiple folds out and creates a mechanical parachute. So there's a face curtain above that, and if I grabbed it and pulled it down, my knuckles past my eyebrows, the canopy would explode off the aircraft. And when it does, you can almost see a little spiral cord in the top of the canopy right there. That pulls the last safety pin, if you will, with the ejection seat. And 0.45 of a second later, the seat travels up the rails at about a 14 G vertical acceleration. So it's not going to be nice on the back. It gets 75 feet above the vertical tail in a 300 knot slipstream with assuming 250 pounds of man and equipment. In that time, a timer goes off. It's set at 0.75 of a second, and then it'll release your feet and undoes the parachutes. And because of that mechanical parachute, the seat is arcing back, and of course that, when it releases, causes a centrifugal force to have man-seat separation. Once I separate, I'm in all current U.S. Air Force from there on down. So, and then because of the contract work I have done and do, as you might expect, the Air Force, everything I've got on is current issued, including the helmet, mask, and visor, and so forth. So once I leave the aircraft, it's all current issue DoD stuff.
Number two was, when you take the cone off for the engine access, you got to re-rig it every time you do that. I guess there's connections in there for the flight surfaces on the tail.
So the flight control, of course, is designed to come apart. So everything is hard rigged, and then there's quick release. The one rod coming from the front, it has a kind of a male rounded end, and then the rod coming from the tail has kind of a female that they kind of fit together like two pieces of puzzle, like when you're building a crossword puzzle. And then it has a collar that goes over there and screws down and locks it into place, and then that's safety wired. And so all the rigging none of the rigging is done there. Rigging is done in the tail or so forth. So that can be taken apart, put back together. That's one of the quickest parts of taking the tail off, actually, is taking that. One rod controls the elevator and the other controls the rudder, obviously. And then from there, you've got wiring that has to be disconnected that runs electric motors and the nav lights and so forth, and hydraulic lines and fuel lines. And we have quite a nice volunteer group, and everybody gets a job. Everybody gets a job. Yes, sir.
So who writes the flight ops manual for this equipment, and who provides the training?
So that's probably a great question. You talking about from a maintenance or operational standpoint?
Operational and maintenance. Is it all? Because obviously it's highly modified. So you probably have a lot of supplemental type certificates.
No, you should, I would think, but the FAA, when these aircraft were starting to release to the general public, I guess you could say, didn't really know what to do with them. So they lumped them as a home-built experimental aircraft. Yeah, no. But that's, to this day, they added another area later, fairly quickly, called experimental exhibition. There's some subcategories there, experimental racing, etc. So we have to submit a maintenance program that I wrote and written it for many other operators. It's about 250 pages long, and essentially that dictates how the owner-operator or maintenance department will integrate the original manuals of the aircraft, how you're going to comply with it. Most of the operators that were operating them in the civilian world until recently would try to operate them without an ejection seat, and so that part of the manual would be, in-opt, and you'd have to label the aircraft. That portion is in-opt, because there's not really a MEL or minimum equipment list like you would see in a Part 135, Part 121 kind of world with the aircraft. So once that's written, that goes through MIDO and the FSDO for approval. And if they approve it, then your maintenance program is approved, and it just basically outlines how you're going to comply with. If the manufacturer said that aileron is only good for so many hours, and you're going to have to put in there how you're going to comply that. Well, I'm going to remove the aileron, I'm going to replace it with another aileron, and I'm going to orbit. So that sort of stuff, and make a maintenance entry accordingly. Originally, you got a letter of authorization. When I started flying these things originally out at Holloman, we were given LOAs, letter of authorization. We had them for the F-100 and the T-33 and the MiG-17, MiG-21, et cetera. Later, they were changed to type ratings. And by changing that LOA to a type rating, it kind of solved some of the problems with the conflicting rules from the FAA, but it created another one because there's no type certificate for a MiG-17 recognized by the FAA. So how does the pilot have a type rating to fly a non-type rated aircraft? It's still a thing. It's still a conflict in there. That's the way they want it. That's how we're operating. So now I have those aircraft on my pilot's license as type ratings. So the aircraft, you have to go to a designated examiner. You have to go through, be able to pass an oral or written on the aircraft. Now most people they'll get some time in a MiG-15 and signed off and get their rating before they ever fly at 17. When I flew the aircraft, the program that we were kind of put through at Williams what was Williams Air Force Base, there was no such thing. They had a MiG-15 two-seater that we all got. I got one flight in, kind of see what it looked like, and then I did an oral and climbed in an airplane, a single-seat airplane, and that's when I first flew a MiG-17. Was by myself. So, but if you think about it, the F-86, there was no two-seat F-86s, and back in World War II, there's no two-seater Corsairs or P-47s. So there's some precedence for that, but I do remember very distinctly, and will always remember, the Air Force had an examiner there that was assigned to them from Hughes Aerospace, which was a program director. It's now part of L3, and there was an FAA examiner there since I was a civilian, and he slapped me on the back as I walked out with my helmet and said, asked me if I'd ever heard the expression "do or die." I said, "Yes, sir," and he goes, "Well, it applies." So I thought, what a jerk. But that may have been a great calculation to get my mind on something besides sweating it out. So the profile for that was I had to take off and land 3 times without using the afterburner. And you can't, no touch and goes, land, taxi back, and initiate a new takeoff. And then they refuel a jet, and you did the same thing with AB. I think I only had to do 2 from that. After the first takeoff, they allowed you a little time to go do air work, and they had a T-33 in the air in case you wanted to stream for help. But really, there wasn't much help they could be, and you really need to know the numbers cold. All your speeds, all your power settings, everything needs to be pretty much cold. And of course, there's no stall warning indicators or anything like that, and you really don't want to stall a 48-degree swept wing aircraft anyway. They will depart quite valiantly. And can enter a spin. And in a MiG-17, if you get into a spin, there's a little white line on the instrument panel, and because the CG is so far toward the center of the aircraft, if you get into a spin and it makes more than 2 turns, eject because it's not coming out. It'll go in with you. So that was later proven by a Navy pilot flying with the Red Eagles in a program that was a follow-on. There's some couple of books that'd be great reading. One of them is called The Red Eagles, and the other one is called Constant Peg. It's written by the original creator of the program. In 1975, they set up at Tonopah at Area 51. Your U.S. Air Force put together a full squadron of MiG-17s, squadron of MiG-21s, and a squadron of MiG-23s, and flew them in Area 51 all the way up until 1988. In fact, every pilot that shot down a Iraqi plane during Desert Storm had flown against the Red Eagles before they ever went. So it was an extremely successful program since we we had a 0 loss to air in that conflict. At any rate, a Navy pilot that got a MiG-17 into a spin fought it for almost 30,000 feet and went in with the aircraft. So he proved that the Russians were right, that it was an unrecoverable maneuver. It gets flat so fast. The engine is kind of midship, so all your mass is in the middle of the airplane. The airplane will just fly, spin around it, and spin around it, and spin around it. You just can't get enough nose down and forward thrust to get it to brake and get it into a dive. So, yes, sir.
Are your instruments written in Russian?
Well, yes and no. All the engine instruments, Celsius for jet temperature is Celsius, doesn't matter, the world around. So all your engine instruments are original. All the pressure gauges and so forth. The Russians don't use PSI, they use atmospheres. Interesting thing about their gauges, like the oxygen gauge. In a U.S. aircraft, at work, you'd call for oxygen out there, and the maintenance guys would come out there and they'd look at the height above sea level and the temperature of the day, and they say, okay, it needs to have 1,700 psi or 1,800, 1,900, whatever that number was to have the system fully serviced. The Russians did it different. They have a mercury spring inside the gauge open to the atmosphere. So that compensates for the temperature of the day. So then you just hook a hose up to it and fill it up, and you're done. Same way with nitrogen. So all the pressures on the airplane or gauges are done that way. And I've scratched my head several times. I'm like, that's just so simple. It's just. So maintenance is, from a maintenance standpoint, you don't have to have any kind of don't look anything up. Just go out there and fill it up till it's full, and you unhook and you're done. Because the gauge has essentially made the corrections for you. So, yes, sir.
Is your company on the aircraft?
Yes.
How did you acquire it?
Well, 1611, the one that's pictured behind me, has got an interesting history. It had some air combat damage in 1968, and we operate 1613 as well, which didn't. 1612 was a combat loss in 1968. This aircraft suffered some damage about right where the pilot's right foot would be, and kind of diagonally up towards the nose of the aircraft. And when it's not painted, you can see where the repair is. We have a mechanic, Henrik, that comes over from Europe, or used to quite a bit. And this aircraft was in his squadron when he was 18 years old. So he retired as a maintenance director for the Polish Air Force for the MiG-29. But it's kind of cool. He comes over, turning wrenches on this, and guy full of stories. How cool it is to see, because they built about 12,000 of these, and there's just a few of them left. So to get to see one of them that was actually in your squadron that your guys worked on, when you worked on it when you were 18, be, I would think, pretty cool. But I'm sorry, what was the original part? While I was flying with the group, which was a very short-lived time out at Holloman, where they were getting parts and so forth. I didn't really play golf so much. I could play it sort of, but I was really more interested in going to seeing how things worked. And I'm also an A&P. So I sometimes in the evenings, because we didn't fly after lunch because it's too hot. So you got out there at sunrise and you were done by usually 10:30 or 11 o'clock in the morning. And I'd go hang out with the maintenance guys a lot. I didn't mind turning wrenches. First, they didn't kind of cotton to me out there a whole lot. They just saw, pilot. Why don't you run along? But once they realized that I really was interested, I really did want to learn, and I didn't mind getting hydraulic fluid running, through my watch down the elbow while I was turning the wrench. We got along real well. At any rate, from that I got some contacts, and I purchased that aircraft from the Polish Air Force directly in May of '94. It had only not flown for 4 years, so it had some of the smallest amount of, out in the field time of any of the MiGs that made it to the United States. It had been flown by a Polish general its last few years of its life. It is obviously nowhere near a frontline fighter anymore, but in the U.S. Air Force, they used to call them hack airplanes. Up until Vietnam or through Vietnam, general officers allowed, if he had the background, to have an airplane assigned to him. Gabrisky had an F-100 assigned to him in Vietnam, and he would visit different people under his command, with a lieutenant riding in the back seat to make sure he didn't, the general didn't do something silly. But after that, the Air Force did away with it. But turns out the Soviets had a similar. So the general had flown this aircraft as a young lieutenant, and so saw it on their register, is still in their inventory. and it took it for his own aircraft. And he retired in May of '90, and the aircraft was immediately retired. He retired when he retired. And I was able to acquire it in May of '94.
Is the aircraft supersonic, capable of supersonic?
It is. I'll tell you a little quickie on that one. The aircraft is capable of about Mach 1.02, 03, so just marginally. And it's got to be at the right altitude, the right temperature, and so forth to do. I almost inadvertently went supersonic with the aircraft doing a test flight over Texas and got a phone call from the FAA over that. That's my second story. The first story was back to Holloman. There was a bunch of East German guys that were flying in the program or working on maintenance on the program, had been around these airplanes before the wall came down. And so I found out that a couple of those guys were on the bar stools right there, and boy, what an opportunity to ask the guys that, flew these things in the Air Force, because, I think I had like 7 hours in the airplane, 8 hours in the airplane. I was just, just trying not to kill myself in the airplane. And so I had all these questions, and I finally got down to that one. I said, so the Dash 1 says that at this altitude and whatever, the aircraft will go supersonic. Will it go that fast? And the third guy on the bar stool had his hamburger, he leans back and he goes, yes, it will go that fast, but it does not like it. So I quickly went, note to self, do not go. And the second part of the story was my little call from the FAA. This is after ADS-B hit the scene. Coming back from Oshkosh, I had a engine wasn't making full power at altitude, and turned out it was the barostatic portion of the fuel controller that had gone south. So the engine would run, but the higher you climb, the less power you'd make. So after a couple of phone calls, flew at low level. I think I diverted into Poplar, no. Little airport south of Little Rock Air Force, Little Rock, and made a phone call. Was I going to have to leave this jet behind or whatever? I said, no, keep it below 18,000 feet. You can still fly it. So flew it home at low level, which meant it was burning gas like it was free. After changing the fuel controller in it, gone through all the ground tests, and everything seemed good. And so I called back to Henrik, actually, and went through the flight test. And he said, oh yeah, you're going to take to 30,000 feet and put the power here, and you should have these readings and so forth. And I'm like, now we're sure that was the fuel controller, right? There's nothing else that was wrong with it before I blast off into this airplane, Oh no, it was definitely. So I set the power and took off, and normally when I'm going cross country to altitude, I've got drop tanks on the airplane, and so it's heavy. There's suitcases in it, and there's spare parts, and telling what on the air circuit. And this time, everything was empty, no drop tanks, clean wings, and so rarely get to fly at the altitude like that. Put the power, and off I went, and man, this thing was really climbing fast. But this is awesome, it's empty like this. I was doing about 6,800 feet a minute at 300 indicated and just going. And so I was at 30,000 feet in about 6 minutes probably from liftoff without even going to full power. And I was on my knee board, I was trying to write down the fuel flows and so forth. I was originally trying to do it every 500 feet, and that was happening way too fast. So tried to do it every 1,000 feet, and that was still kind of tough keeping up. Got up there, and so I asked ATC, I said, look, we only filed to do this at 30, but can I go to 35? Sure. So 35,000 feet only took me another minute, maybe 2 minutes to get up there. So I'm looking around going, wow, I'm over Tyler, Texas, if you know where that is. It's about 90 miles east of Dallas-Fort Worth. And from that altitude, I could see Dallas over there, and I could see Barksdale Air Force Base 80 miles away over in Shreveport. And I thought, well, okay, now start down. I kind of fixed my numbers. And so I started down, and I was probably around 29 or 30,000 feet before it occurred to me that I was wasting my time. I should be writing these numbers down while I go down, right? Make sure the numbers were the same. So I set the power exactly right where he said to do it. And I just got my pen out, started writing, and 28,000 feet, I just felt like I was on a surfboard, and the tail was kind of coming up. And it's almost like a wave, and it just hit me like a ton of bricks, what was just fixing to happen. And I looked over there, and I was about, almost 500 knots indicated at 28,000 feet. And the Mach meter was I couldn't see the end of the needle between that and the real big number. I grabbed throttle, yanked it back, pulled the nose up, threw the boards out, everything all at one time. Whoo, that was close. Down I went, landed, did the paperwork, signed off the fuel controller, get ready to hang the tanks back on, it's ready to go to the next air show. Sitting at home about 8:30, 9 o'clock at night, the phone rings. FAA. Well, I do a lot of work for the FAA on occasion, so I thought, well, that's probably somebody I know, right? So this guy calls and he says he's from Tracon. He said, were you flying November 217 Sierra Hotel about 13 to 1400 this afternoon? Yep. Of course, the ADSB, you know, they already have everything. They know who owns the airplane. They know everything. So, yep. He goes, well, first off, I want to say this is not an enforcement call, but it could have been. We were tracking you at about 0.97. He said, I didn't even know it was a thing, but post 9/11, it is a thing. They have several things in there that they give them keys up that cause a controller, even if they're not looking, they'll light up on his screen that something may not be quite right. And he said, you know, we get this all the time out over Brownwood, Texas, because Lockheed Martin does their initial test flights with the F-35s out that way, and they're always stretching the envelope, you know, before they go back and land and sign off a new airplane. He said, but we weren't used to seeing it east of Dallas. So anyway, he gave me the whole spiel about, you know, what would happen if I went supersonic and fines and you'd pay for property damage and all that sort of stuff. But none of that sounded good, and, you know, just don't do that again. But that was my excitement at almost the speed of sound in the MiG-17.
That close.
Anybody else?
I have one question.
Yeah.
Have you ever had a situation where you had to eject?
No, thank goodness. Watching that engine roll back at altitude, though, with the fuel controller was. I talked to the airplane about, you know, I said, you know, I really don't want to part company this way, you know. Please keep running, you know. But no, I have not. It's as you might have heard, well, it's about a 12 to 14 G vertical ride. So, you know, whether your back recovers fully or whether you end up with issues the rest of your life from it, I mean, you're live, right? But I just soon not ejected. I have met one pilot that ejected out of it. Former East German pilot, now works up at Tinker Air Force Base in Oklahoma, and he described the experience to me, and I decided that, yeah, I don't want to log that in my book. So, anything else?
What's the arm sticking out by the cockpit there?
It's a high altitude, long range antenna, VHF antenna.
Oh, it's a radio antenna.
Yeah, actually it's got two cores in it. It's a VHF and UHF antenna. We use it for our backup radio, for our channel, our number 2 radio, but our primary, we've got a high speed on the belly, and we go through those occasionally because of the speeds I perform in. The erosion on the leading edge of that antenna causes, because the antenna's not really made for, you put them on a Gulfstream, you put them on, they're not really made to go 600 knots, you know. So so the fiberglass, whatever they're made out of, we put coatings, and it's just going to go away. Just every 4 or 5 years, you're just going to put a new antenna on the airplane, or slow down. And that doesn't sound like any fun. So. Well, listen, thank you for having Tina and I come this evening. We really enjoyed coming, and I hope you enjoyed the presentation. Thanks, Alan.
Thanks, Randy. You can see what I'm talking about. The guy's remarkable. This will adjourn our meeting. Please, for those of you who can attend the seminar on March 13, please make the seminar, and have a good evening. Thank you very much.